Right before I start, you saw a picture in Bob's talk of the Peterson's Field Guide to North American Native Fishes. Did you see the authors? It's Lawrence Page and Brooks Burr. And I wanted to mention, since we just had that up there, Brooks Burr, co-author of the Peterson's Field Guide, is going to be one of our speakers at the Catfish Convention this year. So you're going to get to hang out with Brooks. I'm Andrew. Those of you who don't know me, I used to be president of the club. I was for 3 or 4 years. I don't remember exactly how long at this point. Also used to have a big fish store. We had 600 tanks, and we had an absolutely enormous air system going. Every single tank had access to at least 2 outlets for air. I'm not going to build anything that big today, but you're going to see how to do it. Before I get any farther, I do want to thank our 2 companies sent us goodies for me to do this demonstration. Gemco, that's JEHMCO.com, is a fish breeding supply house. Really? Can't hear me back there?
Too many people are talking.
Well, I'll do it for now. When I get into using some tools, I'm not going to be able to do it. Anyway, Gemco, it's a fish breeding supply house. He's got air pumps, he's got air valves, fittings, fish foods, all kinds of crazy stuff. The owner's name is John Meyer. If you need anything, if you're thinking about building anything in your fish room, talk to John. He can help you out with all the technical specs and the products that he has available, and he's going to give you a good price on it too. Also, Swiss Tropicals, Stefan Tanner sent us a bunch of filtration materials here. We'll talk about that in a minute. Stefan asked me to mention his brand new fish food formula. You all familiar with Rapashi Superfoods? This is a new formulation developed by Stefan Tanner. It is called Fruit Loops, and it is a mix of mango, papaya, banana, fig, krill, squid, and insect larvae for a bunch of more specialized feeders. Nobody has this yet, and I think we're going to auction it off today. So he sent us 2 sample packs. That's hitting the market in the next couple months.
What's
All right.
specialized feeder?
It's a specialized fish that need fruit or would benefit from fruit in their diet, like those fish that come from larger tropical rivers and eat the fruit that falls down into the river as a main part of their diet, like a silver dollar, for instance. All right, so why do you want to build an air system? If you have 6 tanks in one spot, either on a rack or in the same room, you will begin to gain efficiencies from having a central air system. You will gain efficiencies in the cost of your filtration. You'll gain efficiencies in the amount of electricity that you're using. And the way electricity prices are going, you can use all the help you can get, especially with all your big fancy lightings that you have on there for your corals and your plants. So if you have at least 6 tanks in one room, you want to start thinking about getting an air system. Most of us go a little farther. How many people have a central air system in their house right now? Oh, fewer than I thought, actually. But you get to a point where you say, I got so many tanks, I got to do something that's a little bit easier. So when my wife Jeanette asked me, how many tanks can I fit over there in that corner under the furnace, I knew it was time to buy a big air pump and start putting some pipe together. Why would you not want a central air system? Well, you don't want to use air on any tank that you're injecting carbon dioxide, CO2 into. It'll just blow it off, and that is a big waste of the resource that you work so hard to get there. The other reason you might not want to use air is if you have a nice display tank and it doesn't really fit into the design of the whole thing. Either you don't want a big sponge filter or you don't want the bubbles coming up if you don't like the way that it looks. Generally speaking, this is for your working tanks, your breeding tanks, your growing tanks, your fry tanks, and your collections of fish that you can't stop acquiring for whatever reason. Everybody here has multiple tank systems. So, very quickly, I'm going to go through pumps. This is one of the things. This is about a $100 air pump right here. It will power up to 20 to 25 outlets. That means that this box right here for $100, you can, with the other materials you see here, filter 10, 15, maybe even 20 small aquaria, fewer than that of larger ones. There's three kinds of air pumps. There's diaphragm pumps like this one, like the little one that Frank had up here. Then you've got diaphragm pumps are the cheapest option, generally speaking. They are making some very large ones now. They can go up to 100 to 200 outlets. I am not the biggest fan of diaphragm pumps, given the other choices available, because I find that they get noisy, and they also have parts that may fail under certain circumstances. Now, if you're going to buy a diaphragm air pump, buy Gemco's, because it is the best one out there, not just because he gave it to me, but this is, I mean, this looks like it was built in the 50s. You know, this thing's gonna last. The parts that fail are the rubber diaphragms that oscillate, create air pressure. Those can dry out and crack after time and have to be replaced. My favorite, for almost everything up to about 100 tanks, I don't think there's too many people that have more than 100 tanks in the room, there might be a couple though, is a linear piston air pump. They are invincible, they will run forever, they are absolutely silent, and they use hardly any electricity. My air pump, my linear piston pump, goes up to about 60 outlets or so, using average flow. It only uses 49 watts of electricity. We're powering about 37, 38 tanks in our home, and this thing is awesome. If I get too much more, I'm going to need to get a bigger air pump. If you're doing a truly large installation, like I had at my store, we had a 1.5 horsepower regenerative blower. Now, if you're measuring the power of your air pump in horsepower, you know that it's a big pump. In fact, this thing was so big.
How big was it?
Who said that? Of course it was Terry. How big was your blower? Anyway, as you compress air, it warms up, just like when you get that deodorant in the morning and it's cold because it's decompressing. It's the opposite way. When you're compressing, it gets hot. The blower we had was so powerful that we had to use cast iron pipe for the first 15 feet of the air system to use as a heat sink, because otherwise the PVC would heat up enough that it would melt and actually pop off of the fittings. Most of you are not going to do an installation like that. If you are, make sure you do your homework on the technical details so you don't have a problem like that. All right, so 40 tanks plus, 30 tanks plus, get a linear piston air pump. Smaller than that, probably use a diaphragm. Well, you can do linear pump too. Linear pumps cost a little more. More than 100 tanks, get a regenerative blower. And get more information than I'm going to be able to give you right now about those, because those are some big, big systems. All right. When you're thinking about your air system, what you are doing is you are pressurizing a series of pipes. This manifold that we're going to build today is no different than an oxygen tank, except that it's long and skinny and goes all the way around your room, or across your fish racks, or however you want to do it. There's two things to consider when you're looking at your air pump. One is pressure, and one is flow. And these things are two completely different, yet inextricably related features. I am not enough of a physicist to understand it. Frank Howard might be able to help you out. He's a chemist, he can't help you with that, sorry. But to give you an idea, this one operates ideally at 1.42 psi. That's pounds per square inch. It's a measure of pressure. 1.42 psi will pump air down 3 feet. So 3 feet between where the air comes out of the tube and the surface of the water. We don't need that much pressure, right? So we're going to use valves to cut it back so we don't have, violent hurricanes inside our tank, as has been discussed earlier. The flow is important. Most air pumps are designed to run ideally at 1.5 psi. So whether you have a little diaphragm pump like this or a giant blower, the pressure is the same. It's just a question of how much air is moving. The flow is important because you have to allow that air to move through your system freely. You got to give it enough space to move around. When you pressurized air, you can have things pushing back on it, and you want to avoid that. Generally speaking, 1 liter per minute operates 1 air device in a smaller tank. This one, let me see if it's written on here, I've forgotten what it is. This is 20 to 25 liters per minute. So that's up to 25 smaller air accessories like sponge filters or air stones. So the materials we're going to use Schedule 40 PVC. This is the white polyvinyl chloride piping. This stuff is cheap, it's easy to find, it's easy to work with. The only drawback about it is that if it is exposed to too much ultraviolet light, it will decay. It will fall apart, turn into flakes. Don't use it outside unless you wrap it. Most of us don't have outdoor fish rooms. Some of us do put stuff outside in the summertime. But some people didn't realize this, and they were putting together their giant saltwater systems with their 400-watt metal halide lights, and they had some PVC piping carrying water in this case, not air, which is even worse. And that giant blue light ate the PVC, and it turned into powder, basically, and the water exploded all over the place, giant mess. So, it doesn't like UV light. No direct sunlight. Don't put it in the way of super powerful saltwater lighting, especially, but also plant lights. And keep one thing in mind, fluorescent bulbs, not LEDs, but fluorescent bulbs and incandescent bulbs, the spectrum decays over time. As the bulb ages, you'll see that you have this bright, beautiful color on the tank when it's brand new, and then it turns kind of yellowish. Those bulbs will actually produce UV light if they're too old. So that's a source of it that you might not imagine to begin with. For size, this is 1-inch PVC. Up to about 40 tanks, your air manifold should be about 1-inch PVC. 40 to 80 tanks, you want to go up to 1.25 PVC. If you're doing more than 80 to 100 tanks, you want to go to 1.5 PVC. I don't have a piece of that here. The only difference is the cost of the fittings goes up significantly, and it's also harder to cut. You can get all kinds of fittings. You'll see here on the end, it's a 90-degree elbow. This is called an L, technically spelled E-L-L. This is a slip joint in here, which means that you just stick the pipe into the fitting. And I can show you how to glue it in a minute. The other kind of joint that you're going to find is threaded joints, like we have here. You can see that I have a hose bar that is screwed into this T. This is a T, spelled T-E-E. And so you got to make sure you have the right fittings for the right things to connect. That can be a little bit tricky. Fortunately, it's easy. Pipe threads, incidentally, you're going to see NPT. That's National Pipe Taper. If you buy a 3/4-inch NPT fitting and another 3/4-inch NPT fitting, they are going to fit together. It doesn't matter if it's made out of brass, if it's made out of plastic, if it's made out of cast iron, or any other material. It is a standardized measurement of pipe threading, and they will all fit together, assuming it's the same size. And generally, it's increments of inches. Some of the other fittings that you're going to find, if you cut your pipe and you realize you made a mistake, where did it go? You can get a coupler, which you just stick to, hold on, dumping the mic. Just stick it on there, stick your other side in there, glue it together. It's like it never happened, except you got a funny looking coupler right there. A couple of style points when you're designing your system. You're going to see that the pipe has writing on it. Try to turn your pipe so that this is not facing the world. It's just nice, clean, white pipe, because if you're staring at this, you know, it's a little ugly. It's not going to change how it works. You might not care about that kind of thing, but I try to think about it when I'm making the system. It drives me a little nuts when I look at it. So the other thing you're going to need, air valves. These are air valves here. Got a little handle, control the flow. Buy the brass ones. Don't even think about the plastic ones. In particular, buy these from Gemco. This is called the AV1E. For those of us who built fish rooms in the last 10 or 20 years, you probably used AV1Bs. Those aren't being manufactured anymore, so now we got the E's. But the reason you want to buy this one is that it's self-tapping, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to install this. Because going around with a tap and die set is a pain in the neck. If you're using plastic valves, you have to do that for everything. Plus you risk cross-threading as you shove it in. I am terrible at crossing. Everything I try to twist into something else, it just ends up being cross-threaded. It's a giant pain in the neck. You're also going to need a bleed valve. I'll explain that in a minute. This controls the pressure in your system. You're going to buy a pump that's larger than what you need. But that doesn't mean you want the pump to be working harder than it needs to. You got to release that extra air, because if a pump is pushing harder than it needs to, it will eventually break down. You will wear the pump out. Even the linear piston pumps, especially the diaphragm pumps. With the regenerative blower, it doesn't mind so much, but the nice thing about the blower is they use variable amounts of electricity. If you don't have a lot of work for it to do, and you don't ask it to do a lot of work, it will use less electricity. And if you're talking about 200 watts variance between a low load and a high load, you don't need to use that 200 watts on a high load. That's a lot of dough you're going to save over the course of a year. Because remember, these things are on all the time. So a small number of watts is going to make a big difference in how much it costs to operate your fish room or your shop or breeding operation, whatever you have going on. Real quick, airline tubing, there's two kinds you can get. There's silicone. Silicone stays nice and supple. It never gets hard. It never gets brittle. It doesn't stick on your fixtures like the vinyl stuff does. It costs 2.5 to 3 times as much. Might be worth the upgrade. The other one is vinyl. That's the one everybody is used to, the clear airline tubing. If you leave it on for a couple of years and then you try to go take your airline off of your bar, it's not coming off. You got to either burn it off or cut it if you're lucky. So that's most of it. Where do you want to put your system? You want it up in the air. You want it above the surface level of your tank. And the reason is that under very rare circumstances, if your power goes off, especially with a diaphragm pump, you can create a back siphon and it can suck the water out of your tank and onto your floor. We don't want this to happen. Now, if practicality demands it, my air system, a portion of it is below the surface of the tank, but that's because I had a big furnace in the ceiling and I had to get around it. It was the only place I could put it. But you can screw it into the ceiling, you can screw it into the wall, you can screw it into the racks that you have the tanks on, or the stands, or whatever you're using to support all of these tanks that you need to have filtered. Always make your air system a loop. If it's a straight line, the air outlets at the end will not have the same pressure available as the air outlets at the beginning. So even if you're just doing one string of tanks, you've got your 2 pieces of PVC going in a straight line. Imagine they're going like that. What you want to do is make a loop that goes up and over the top or down and underneath to make sure that you get consistent flow. If you're doing a very, very large system, again like I had, you might want to do a cross piece or 2 to balance the flow throughout the whole system. Your bleed valve goes on the opposite side as your pump. That's where the lowest pressure is going to be. You want it to be, farthest away. Put it on the opposite side. You can also get pressure gauges, by the way. It might not be a bad idea for a very large system. They're not terribly expensive. It's just another thing to install. I didn't get one from John. I didn't ask for it. He probably would have sent it to me if I did, but I wasn't thinking when I sent the email. So that's it. The stuff you need, if you can operate a hand drill, power drill, or a hacksaw, you can make a central air system. It's really easy. It's frighteningly easy. I have terrible craftsman skills. I'm not good at making stuff, but this stuff makes me look like a master builder. So you need your measuring tape. When you mark off where you want to put your air valves and your stringer, use Sharpie. Mark up the, you can see I had a different idea. I've got a bunch of marks here. Then I changed my mind and said I wanted to do it differently. That's cool. When you're measuring it out, test everything before you start cutting and drilling. As your toys cut once, as they like to say. This one is going to have 6 air valves on it. It is a 48-inch length of pipe. I've got 9 inches here, I've got 9 inches here, and I have 6 inches in between each of the valves because I think it looks cool. You can put them closer together if you want to. It really doesn't matter. Oh, when you're designing your tank, by the way, I like to have at least 1.5 valves per tank. That way, if I want to use a second airline, a second filter in that tank, I've got it available. If I want to drop down an air stone for a floating egg catching container like I do with Cory eggs, I have it available. Anytime I need air, I just put another airline into an open valve, and I'm ready to go. Or if you're growing Daphnia on the other side of the room, if you need some air for your Daphnia cultures, you just drop down from your air manifold. It's right there ready. You don't have to go to the pet store and buy an air pump or buy a filter or anything like that. It's all ready to go for you. Cutting PVC. These are PVC cutters. If you've worked with PVC, you have these. If you haven't, it looks like a weird pair of scissors. This makes things really easy. This is a scrap piece of PVC. It's okay if I cut it, at least I hope it is. It's got a ratchet and a blade. And put it on your mark where you want to cut. Ratchet it through. And you've cut your PVC. You're not going to get a perfect cut with these, but that's okay because in 1-inch PVC, you have 5/8 of an inch of wiggle room inside your fitting. It's going to be diagonal. You can use a hacksaw if you want to, but it's going to make an enormous mess. You're going to have little white plastic shavings everywhere. If you have a lot to do and you don't want to break your wrists on one of these things, after your 80th cut you're getting a little sore, you can use a miter saw, chop saw. But if you're going to use a miter saw, go slowly. So if you do it like you're cutting 2x4s, like you're an old pro, if you do that, the blade's going to catch on the pipe, it's going to shatter, and you're going to have razor sharp shards of plastic flying all over the room, probably injuring yourself. I've done it a couple times. I was wearing safety goggles, thankfully. If I hadn't been, I'd be talking to you like this right now, because it was a pretty ugly situation. So go slowly with the miter saw. Go like that. Don't jam it down because it will pop on you. All right, gluing. It's really easy. Got PVC glue. Buy it at the hardware store. I'm only going to glue one piece because I don't want you all to be seeing blue spots on the ceiling when I'm done with this. Use this in a well-ventilated area. This is basically the same stuff as your mono glue. Take the fitting you're putting the pipe into. Remember, slip fitting means it slips right in there. You get a good layer of glue all the way around. Before you put the glue in there, you've marked your pipe so that you know how everything goes together. And you go in there and you slide it in. Once you've done that,
you're done.
You're done. This is not coming off. That's it.
Been there, done that.
You don't have to glue your air manifold if you don't want to, but if it's a semi-permanent or permanent installation, I recommend that you do. Again, ventilate the room, you will get a terrible headache, you'll start feeling nauseous, you might start seeing things that aren't there. Okay? It is not good for you to be breathing these fumes. Now, that sounds funny, but if you have a small fish room, like a 10x12 bedroom that you're working with, or a room in the basement, and it's enclosed, and you start working with this stuff all day, you can actually do some harm to yourself with it.
Keep you very high.
Like he said. Now we know. I'll leave that one alone, George.
I have a closed room.
All right, so that's gluing. All right, I got my coupler on there. I could glue the other side in here. Again, any slip fitting can be glued. You don't have to be as careful as you would as if I was pumping water through here. If this leaks a little bit, it's not catastrophic. It's just a little bit of air, okay? If I was doing water, I would use the PVC cleaner or prepper and then the glue, and I'd also be a lot more careful about making sure I had an even layer throughout the whole thing. Of course, it's good to practice doing it as well as you can, just for the sake of doing it, but it's not absolutely necessary. All right, Drilling your marks. Like a good chef, I had this in the oven before we started taping, but I did leave 2 holes. When I'm drilling PVC, I first drill a pilot hole.
Oh, you got it, the wall, you
I only have 1 drill, but if I'm only going to have 1 drill, it's going to be a good one.
I have it.
Pilot hole with a very small drill bit. The reason is when you use your big fat drill bit on this nice, shiny, slippery plastic surface, it's going to skitter all over the place and usually into your thumb because you have to hold it firmly. If you're a good craftsman, you might want to put it in your vise or use a clamp. Once you're through the first wall, you got to stop. It will go right through the other side. Or you can shove your drill bit so far into your drill that it can't reach the other side, which is what I've done with this one. So this is a very, very small, skinny drill bit. It's not the one that has the right size to use for the valves, but I'm just going to drill my holes real quick. You want to try to get it perpendicular to the axis so everything looks nice and straight. That's actually not too bad. Usually mine are all like sticking out different angles and things like that. Because again, I'm not the best craftsman in the world. Alright, so these AV1E valves, all you got to do is get a number 14 drill bit. I have no idea what a number 14 drill bit is, except that John from Gemco told me it's what I needed. It's fairly close to a 3/16, but it's not the same. So again, I'm jamming it all the way in there so I don't actually have enough room to drill through to the other side. And I'm just going to make my final hole that I will screw the valve into momentarily. And this is what I'm talking about when you got this nice slippery surface. Very easy with the pilot hole to get the drill bit where it needs to be and not sliding all over the place. And a nice hole like that. Blow it out afterwards. There's going to be plastic filings in here. Alright, for those experienced people in the crowd who have used your tap and die sets to make threads in all of the holes, imagine me putting 1,400 threads. I hired a kid to do it. I didn't do it. You know, that was a pain in the neck. This is the valve before it's installed. We've got the barb for the airline, we've got the control handle, and we've got the threads. Turn the control handle perpendicular to the flow of the air. Put the hose barb into the chuck of your drill. Tighten it. And since I have the perfectly sized hole from the perfect drill bit, because John from Gemco is such a nice and smart guy, I can then very slowly install my valve, release the chuck, if I can figure out which way it goes, and it's in.
Wow.
That's a lot easier than going around and tapping everything. I like to make all of the handle barrels face the same way. I think it looks professional. It doesn't have anything to do with the function, but it will make it easier to use. So I've got them all pointing this way. And I've got one more to do here real quick. Then I can put my manifold together. So again, turn the handle so that I have room. It's not going to bump into anything. Put the barb into the chuck of the drill. Tighten. Firmly, but slowly and gently. Just like that. It also helps if you stick your tongue out like Charlie Brown. I went a little bit too far with that one, so I'm going to have to adjust it. Make sure you have an adjustable wrench or set of pliers, because sometimes these can be a little bit tricky to move. I will try doing it a little rough on the thumbs, especially if you have to do more than one. So now we're going to assemble the air manifold system. Again, this is not drilled. Someone is going to get to take this home, but not today. So I've got everything's pre-cut, pre-measured. It only took me about an hour to put all of this stuff together when I was preparing for this presentation. So all the cutting and the valves that I put in there, now I've done a couple of them before, but even if you are inexperienced, it's not that hard to put it together. So, this is above my tanks. I want to have my air valves facing downward. Possibly facing outward, but I think it looks silly. So face the direction you want your airline tubing to be going. The bleed valve, it doesn't really matter which way you put it in there. And that's it. Ready for installation.
Yay.
Now, almost done. Unless you have a very large blower, you're going to have a hose barb on the end of your air pump. So you're going to need to get flexible PVC tubing that goes to the appropriately sized hose barb with male threads that then goes into your PVC fitting. Anytime you have anything pressurized going onto a hose barb that's of any substantial size, use a hose clamp. So before I stick this on the pump though, I got to make sure that it's on the tubing. So I'll stick this on the pump and realize that I haven't done it. So that's it. If you're having trouble getting the tubing onto your barb, soak it in some boiling water. I'm not going to close this because we're going to be selling it. If you're doing a larger one, use the metal hose clamps. One quick trick with the metal hose clamps, if you have one of these multi-size screwdrivers, you can take the bit out and just use that on top of the nut. It's a lot easier than using a Phillips head screwdriver to try to tighten these, or excuse me, a flathead screwdriver to try to tighten these things, because it slips all over the place. It's a nightmare. So now, we're going to fire it up. Since having the appropriate pressure is good for your pumps, the way you get everything started, you want to have every air valve that you are going to use opened halfway. That's diagonal this way. So this is halfway. You want to have your bleed valve completely shut. That's turned all the way clockwise, tighty-righty. Bring it over to your tank. I have made this incredibly difficult for myself here. Oh, pump goes on the floor. These things vibrate, which means that over time they walk. If you put this up on a shelf somewhere, it's going to wobble and wind its way. It will take months, but it will happen. And it will yank everything down and turn off, and if you're not home, your fish are going to be starving. You can hear that's a lot of air coming out of those little valves right there.
I don't hear the machine making the noise I thought it would make. Didn't you say this was a loud one?
This is brand new out of the box.
No, you said
It's
this
already making a vibration noise. If I was sleeping next to this, I could not sleep.
Oh.
If I had a linear air pump next to my head, I would be fine. It will get louder as it gets older. So then, we're going to hook everything up. This is probably not the way you would do it. Actually, George, can I get a hand here? Jim, will you too? I'm going to get these guys to hold it up over the tank as if I had made an installation. So now I've got my first filter going. I have so many filters in here because I wanted to show you a bunch of different kinds. The other cool thing about having an air system is that you get that cool lots and lots of bubbles sound. If you only have power filters, you get a mechanical hum in your fish room. That kind of stinks. I like having the bubble noises. I like white noise. I don't like mechanical noise, but I like the white noise. And yes, my fish room is right outside my bedroom. That's the way it's set up. And we got, oh, started too far over here. So, obviously getting plenty of flow out of everything. I can make my adjustments. If I still have too much, I will shut down the bleed valve, or actually I'm going to open it up and then open these up all the way and see if I have enough pressure. But you just got to play with it until it looks right, until everything has the appropriate amount of air running through it. Real quick on air filters, I think we're going to go ahead and turn this off and we can put it down. Getting them long enough, I hope. Yep. All right. This is what I use in most of our, we use in most of our tanks. Jeanette's sitting there saying, what's this I? She does guppies, I do cichlids and corys. I use a lot of these because they're cheap, they're easy to clean. Slip the barrel sponge off, squeeze it out, tank water, put it back on. These are good for about a 10-gallon tank. You can do 2 of them in a 20. One of the things I really like about them is the directed flow. You can swivel it. This is mine, I'm not giving it to the club, it wasn't donated by anybody, so it's going back in the bucket right now.
And they come just for 10-gallon tanks, not big tanks?
Well, not the barrel sponges like that. If you're doing a larger tank, you would use the very familiar ATI sponge filter. These things, you can get them in sizes up to a 200-gallon tank or so, depending on how heavy the load is. Don't get the gray foam, get the black foam. The gray foam clogs up with junk, very difficult to deal with. Quick tip on these, if you want to turbocharge your ATI sponge filters, take your sponge apart. The little bullseye in the top has another airline. Get a little nub of airline and an air stone. You'll get smaller bubbles and more of them, and you'll move a lot more water. An air-driven implement can drive up to about 600 gallons an hour, depending on how deep in a standard size aquarium. I mean, you can move a lot of water using air. What basically happens is that the air bubble catches water on the way up the tube and drags it along with. This guy was given to us by Gemco. If you want to use chemical filtration, get the little box filter, you can put your carbon in it, you can put your bag full of Purigen in it, you're good to go. You want something a little nicer, you get this from Swiss Tropicals. This is a cube filter, and the way he makes his uplifters, he gets amazing flow out of these things. I mean, they really are better, and they do make a difference. They cost more. If you want a filter you never have to clean, then you want to go to the new Hamburg Matten filter, which is this black block of foam. You get the jet lifter pump, the air comes out of here, pumps water in here, sucks back through the foam, back behind it, and these things are so big. Now, it's going to cost you, but imagine having a filter. Most professional operations are going to these right now because it costs more in labor and time to clean the filters. I mean, they pay for themselves if you're paying someone to clean your own filters, which most of us are not in here, but if you are, it'll pay for itself in about 6 months, not having to clean it. And then you've got your air stones. You've got hang-on hatcheries, like the Marina hatchery, all kinds of things you can use with air. I think I'm probably out of time, badly.
No.
So thank you all very much. I'm happy.
Else.
The scent and the odor that it gives off.
Yeah.
I know that probably cures in, what, 48 hours, something like that affects. Is that odor dangerous to pump into an aquarium? Like you can smell
The
it.
solvent for the
solvent.
for the pipe glue is not soluble in water. It cannot dissolve into water, and therefore it will not harm your fish.
Won't get them hot?
It will not get them seeing
Don't
funny spots.
fish.
All right. If you want to blow it all out, let your air system run for a couple of days. It's a pain in the neck to do that. I mean, I'll run water through within 5, 10, 15 minutes of gluing a water system, and have never had a problem even in like a coral tank or something like that. So it's not that big a deal.
Just an add-on to this, you do have to clean them. Once
About
a year.
once a year.
Once a year. I have to clean mine once a year, put it that way. And they also come, you get them a little wider than the tank, they fit in there and hold
This was
themselves-
not cut to the
No,
right size.
Hold it in place. You cut a V in the top so that this sits down in that V and runs right at water level to give you all that extra water flow. And when it goes sideways on you, because like this, if you're just sets it in there. You just get a zip tie, stick it through the filter around the back of it, back out the other side, and zip it. You can hold it right in place. These are really great filters.
How do you clean them?
You take them out.
Rinse them
And
out
you
with
rinse
your
them, but you
hose, or
don't
you rinse
squeeze
them
them.
out in the tank water?
You take them outside and put them on the
Recommended
sidewalk and
that
use a
you-
high pressure hose.
What's that, George?
Ah,
But you don't squeeze the
Say
foam,
again?
it'll break
Can
it.
you say that again?
I said, I take mine out and put them on the sidewalk outside and use a high pressure hose.
Yeah, I walk on mine and then spray them.
And in the meantime, the idea of having two different filters or adding one of these like number 5s, one of these level filters in your tank for the week or so before you're gonna clean this, leaves bacteria in the tank for the time that you're cleaning it out, and then when you put it back in, all that bacteria will build up, back up on this space.
What is it called again? That
They're called
Correct.
Matten filters,
Yeah, but
Perrette filters, or Hamburg filters.
Hamburg
Matten
Hamburg
filter.
Matten filters.
It's actually a special foam.
HMF.
Don't go to Home Depot and buy any foam off the shelf and stick it in your fish tank, it will kill everything in your
Yeah.
tank.
You need to buy the right stuff.
We should do a group buy, but I'm not
Swiss
volunteering to do
Tropicals.
it.
Swiss Tropicals out.
Swiss
of
Tropicals,
Steven.
Steven
They
Tanner.
actually come in like 4 or 5 different meshes, and you should ask John at Temco or something.
Or ask one of us that has all of them in our filters.
Yeah, I've got them, but I can't remember what the mesh numbers are.
They come 10, 20, and 30.
So this stuff is all belongs to the club, it's gonna be raffled or auctioned off at a later time, including that whole manifold that I just built that can be modified to fit your tank system, if you wanna do it, with the pump and everything else. So,
Yeah, but then every
but George will tell you when that's gonna happen.
Okay. Property's pre-auction. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.